Hey everybody, so I've been thinking about this project for a while. One of the first videos on our channel was making a laced tote bag, so no stitching. And I got that idea from these old, these are like from the 60s, 70s, these are just saddlebags. And usually every town would have, you know, some hippie leather worker making these on either on the sidewalk or, you know, you could go get your sandals and stuff, and they're all usually, the signature of this style is there's like a lot of different tooling and lots of flowers and that sort of thing. But what I've always wanted to do is I have like a big vintage collection that we pull from for inspiration for design and stuff. I've always wanted to take one apart, make it into a pattern, because a lot of these came as kits. You could just go to the store and buy a leather bag kit, and then you would buy some tooling stuff and just make yourself a leather bag. So I'm sure those exist still to this day, but I wanted to take one apart, make a new pattern, make one just to make one, and then hopefully we can figure out how to put the pattern up on the website. It's going to be much larger than a wallet or whatever. So this is probably going to be a couple parts, but today this is the one that I've picked to take apart. I know it's beautiful, and with this stuff, unfortunately, a lot of the times you have to take apart the most beautiful one, because that's the one you're trying to figure out how it was made, get the measurements and stuff. We'll make some adjustments to it, and then we'll get into making the pattern. So the bag that I picked out to take apart, it's in good shape, so what I'm going to try to do is take it apart. The lacing should come out. Sometimes the lacing cracks, but I picked this bag because I like the size, but I also like the design. So you have a little bit more of an artistic shape to this curve here, but then you have where the strap is attached, kind of pops it out, gives it some dimension. I also like that with a couple of the other ones with the closures, you really probably couldn't get around using the closure that they have, but with this one, if you don't want to use this strap, you could just there's plenty of room to do a different type of closure. This one also has a couple pockets on the inside, and I'm interested to see once we get this part. I think one is actually stitched in, but this is all split, I believe. I don't think this is full grain leather on the inside, which is something that they would do a lot of the time. And then it's also cool that you can see the patina of its use over the years. You can see how, you know, it probably wasn't super well taken care of for a little while, and it was all, you know, got all these marks in it from being a little dry. Whoever used it would maybe from their fingernails putting the flap back and forth. So unfortunately we are going to take it apart, but I'm going to do my best to do so in a way that will allow us to put it back together in the end. So let's get started with that. So I always like to note how these things are put together, because when we make our own, we want to know that, right? Because we want to reproduce it as best we can. So I'm going to use this little plastic pokey tool thing to take out all of the lacing. And as we can see, the first note is the way that they secured the lacing is pretty simple. They just kind of laced and then they backstitched one and put it in between the layers. And now this is what we did with when we make these bags as well. You can also, sometimes I'll do knots, but what you do is you wet the lacing so that when it dries, it's actually wet molded in and you can't pull it out. So you don't really need a knot, because this is all sort of wet molded in place, and leather this thin, when it's this tight, isn't going to move. In my bag, I've had my bag for 5 or 6 years now, and the lacing's never moved. So we can see that they did sort of like a back stitch thing to secure it, and that's all they did. They just went through and into the middle. And so that is going to allow us to slowly but steadily take out all of this lacing and preserve it if we can. Like I said, it might crack. We got the front panel off, and we can start to see now. And you can really see, like, this is just kind of thrown in there. And I love leathercraft like this because it's not perfect, but the imperfections really add to the character of the bag. You know, they kind of just slapped in an interior pocket. It's not level, it's not even. The stitching's not perfect. Oddly enough, it is full grain leather. Now that I can get a good look at it, they just put it all facing inwards so that you get the back of the leather on the inside of the bag. Oh, okay. So going through this, it looks like either this was repaired or they ran out of lacing and had to splice in a new stitch. You can see this double stitch here. It's not on the front. The front is every other all the way through. But if we open this up, you can see there's a tail there. And that's going to be for this piece of lace. Then a new piece starts right here. So this is the back stitch for that. So I'll pull that out. And this bag's so old, I don't know if we're ever gonna, or at least my skill in telling if this is an original, just they ran out of lace, or if it's a patch, meaning the lacing split and someone redid it over at some point in time. I'm probably not gonna be able to tell you that. But that does point out, one of the cool things about this construction style is that we're working with pretty much, I mean, this is just one solid piece of leather. That's not gonna break down. I mean, this is at least 30, 40 years old. The only thing that's really gonna break is your leather stitching, and this is actually, when you do leather lace like this, it's very, very strong. So most of this looks to be original to the bag. But if you ever have to do a repair, or if you're selling these and someone comes in with a repair, very, very simple to do. You just cut yourself a little piece of lace, dip it in some water, and splice it in, and you're off in no time. So I'm just going to keep taking this apart. We're getting closer to knowing what this is, what kind of leather this is. I think this is a chrome tan leather because it's got the blue core. So it makes sense that this would be a bit of a cheaper material on the inside. I can't tell if this was a kit or if this was somebody's own design yet. I'm pretty sure that it was hand cut. It wasn't die cut, which would have been an available technology back then. So we'll just keep on trucking and come back when I have some more news for you. So one of the things that I'll do when I'm recreating a piece, or if someone will send them in something to copy, is I'll take a lot of pictures of little details so that I can always return to them and be like, okay, how is this made? And once you have a picture of this, you'll be able to tell, you can always refer back to it and say, okay, how did they do this back stitch, for example? Or with this little seam here, you know, how was this tucked in on both sides in such a small area? Now that we have our pictures, we can just refer back to it and look at the pictures and, you know, get a couple angles, etc. So you can you make sure you see what's going on, because we're going to take all this apart. We're not going to have it to refer to again, and our other bags aren't made in the same way. All right, and so we have everything taken apart. And you can see now, this is why these were very popular to be sold in kits, because it's really just, you know, a few dies, clicker dies, and you had yourself a nice kit. But I do believe that this one was hand punched. Just there are some inconsistencies with the holes. This is definitely tooled by hand. So, and just the way that these corners are cut. Yeah, I don't think it was a kit. So that means we have someone's one-off creation here, and we're definitely going to modify it a little bit. But you have to remember that this was a very popular style of the time. So, and it still is if you're a vintage collector. It's still, this stuff doesn't really, I think Double RL does stuff like this all the time. It sort of became a design standard in leathercraft, right? So we're going to adjust it a little bit. We don't know who made it, but it's definitely 40 or 50 years. Geez, what year is it? 2027? Yeah. It's like 50, 55 years old, I would guess. 60s, mid-60s to mid-70s. Just by the smell and the materials and stuff. I could be wrong. But yeah, so we're going to start making a pattern now. So to make our pattern, I have cover stock here. I just put a piece of tape on one side. Then I'm going to flip it over and get our leather piece. The first one we're going to trace. And this was hand cut because these curves are different. So that's really cool. I'm going to leave all the inconsistencies in here for now, and then I'll go back and readjust everything later. And all I'm doing is, if you have poster board, you don't need to tape things together. I don't. This is the only thing we use. So I'm not going to tape this front part until I trace, just so that the pencil will come out underneath it. One of the important things is, because this has been a three-dimensional thing for so long, it's going to want to stand up and be bumpy. So you want to make sure that you press everything down so that you can get some smooth lines. And I'm going to plop that down there so that it doesn't move as much. Then the hardest, not really the hardest, but the most intricate part of using this lacing design is actually getting your stitches, your lacing holes right, because they need to be even amounts so that your back stitch always lands on the inside. So when you do something like this, that work is already done for us. It's a little time consuming, but I'm just going to go through and do a rough trace of all of these holes that were punched. Again, I want to make sure that I press this down, this leather, so that our seam is meeting up with the line we traced, so that our stitching holes, our lacing holes, land in the correct position. So besides the straps, that pattern is basically just these three pieces. We need two of these. We will need two of these, and we'll just not include, we'll just straight cut this and that'll make the interior pocket. But all we have to do is cut these out. What I'm gonna do to do that, at least on the straight pieces, is I'm gonna use a ruler and kind of take like the most common path here to make a good straight side, because that, at some point when it was cut, I'm sure, was a straight line. So we can kind of just guesstimate. It doesn't have to be perfect with a bag this style. But we will make it perfect when we put it into the computer. So that everything will be, it'll be a nice proper to spec pattern with real right angles, because right now nothing is going to be straight. So next thing we're going to do, we got to punch the holes in the pattern. Pretty simple. I just wanted to show you what I'm doing. I found a punch. This is a 3/16 punch, and it fits pretty much exactly as these, the same size as these holes. It's going to look a little big when you do something like this. You're going to be like, wow, that's a really big hole. You're going to be tempted to punch a smaller size hole, but don't do that. Your lacing, this is already really slim lacing for a bag this style. Any smaller than this, you're not going to be able to get wide enough lacing through to have the strength that you need. So I have some, this is like 8-ounce leather. Once we have our patterns all done, we need to trace everything out. So I'm using pretty much, I don't know if you can see this on camera, but it's pretty much exactly the same thickness. This, of course, is much softer because it's been used for 30 or 40 years. But this whole thing is going to be a little tedious because we have to mark all the punchings again. But when it comes to putting it all together, it's going to be a cinch because the lacing process is much easier than hand sewing. So I'm just going to go ahead and trace all this stuff out. The multiple pieces that we need, we'll trace those as well. And then we'll get to assembling. Notice I switched to a pencil from the scratch-all when I'm marking all these little holes. It's just easier. The scratch-all is not as smooth, so you have to go a lot slower. And by default, since we punched all of these holes in the pattern with the punch that we're using a pencil on the inside of the holes, you're going to have no pencil left over punching because the hole is going to be bigger than the mark that we make. So I have everything cut out, but the holes aren't punched yet. Before I punch holes, I'm going to burnish any edges that I need to burnish. I'm just worried that once I punch all these holes, it'll be a little floppy and it won't let me bevel. So I looked at the pictures that I took before, like we talked about, and these two pieces are going to be on the outside. So we need to burnish pretty much all around everything here. And then I'm going to burnish just one edge and the tops, and then we should be good to go to start punching holes. Once we are burnished, we're going to take our 3/16 inch hole punch and our mallet, and we're going to punch all of the holes. I guess I don't really ever talk about mallet weight, but you know, questions come up. We get some emails with questions and stuff about mallet weights. What mallet should you get? I generally use 2 mallets. These are Berry King mallets, or mauls. I don't know what the weights are. I think this is the 24 ounce, and I think this is the 12 or 16, maybe. I have a little one and a big one, and the way that I figure out which one to use for what project, first of all, I only had this one for the first like 7 years I was in leatherwork. I only had this size. So you can get by with one mallet or maul, no problem. But a good way to kind of show you how you know what maul to use for what project. So this is 8-ounce leather. This is our small maul that we have. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my hole here, and the way that you use maul, it's weighted so that you don't have to do as much work, you let gravity do the work. So when I take my maul, what I'm doing is I'm raising it, and I'm not swinging it, I'm just kind of dropping it and guiding it down with my hand. When I use the small maul, if I do that, you can see we go through, but we don't go through every time when we're going at speed. So you can see literally every other one goes through. Now, if we pick up the heavier maul, which I'm pretty sure this is the 24-ounce, and we have a couple cheaters here because we're already punched halfway through, I'm not swinging this. I'm just dropping it and guiding it with my hand. Ready? You can see with this one, because this is a bit thicker leather, we go all the way through every single time, and it saves us a lot of energy having to swing, because if I wanted to make use of this small maul, I could, but I would have to swing and strike hard, which is going to take a lot more energy from me. Now, doing one project, not that big of a deal, but if you're like us and you're using these all day, every day, you want to size, if you have to size 300, 400 belts with a single hole punch, you don't want to do it with this. You want to do it with your bigger maul, because over, a few hours, that energy savings of being more efficient by just having to drop the maul instead of swinging and punching the whole time is going to save your arm a lot of work, etc. So that's kind of my little rant about mauls, I guess. But we're just going to finish punching out. We got a few hundred holes to punch, so we're going to get that done. And here we go. So we've taken the bag apart, we made our pattern, and we have everything cut out of leather. I think this is going to be it for this week, just because I think this video is probably long enough going through the bags and talking about everything we talked about. So what I need from you guys is, we have all of these old bags, and we need to figure out what kind of closure that we're going to do. So we could try to go like very era correct and do the sort of magic braid thing. We could do, this is like a button, and this just wraps around like this. This is really cool looking. Or we could do some sort of other closure. You can see how they did this here where it's all tied and there's leather washers underneath it to make a button. So in the comments, let me know what kind of closure you think would look cool on this thing. And maybe we'll do a couple different options, or maybe we'll just pick the one and we'll make that. But until then, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.